Thank you, Vikram. I'm going to open to the House, but before I do that, I'd like to make 3 points, like Tommy Cole. The first point is that there has been references about earlier discussion. So you may be wondering what is this mysterious thing they're talking about. Well, there was closed-door session to have frank discussion between the scholars and media people and the business people, no business people, mainly media people, earlier on. There was no blood spill, and I think Robin Jeffrey and Professor Rigby made sure that things were kept to proper rules, and therefore nobody fought. That went on very well. That's the reference number one. Number two is Professor Shen made a reference to Gujarat doctrine and also said, why doesn't China follow this? If I may just throw a word of explanation. I think China-India relations is a very long, old one, and in many ways, it had India and China connected over knowledge, over religion, and so on. But in modern times, China has a deep suspicion on Tibet. I think Tibet is a core issue for China. Dalai Lama lives in India, and China always feels a little uneasy with this situation. And as long as that situation prevails, and as long as his successor is not properly designated, I think the relationship is not going to be any better. This is my feeling, and that's why China doesn't become, very generous and sort of thing. But what Vikram said about the business, this is growing very fast. The third point I have is I want to throw a controversial statement on the table. I don't think anybody has got weapons, so don't attack me, attack the others. And what I want to say is this, that from my little observation of India, and a little bit on China as well, I think the media has not served India-China relations at all. It has been something that has worked against good relations. Whereas business, as Vikram pointed out, I think has somewhat started to serve to promote India-China relations. Why do I say this? Because if you I'll take 2 issues. One is water. There was a time when the Indian newspapers ran pages after pages every day, something about China cutting off the Brahmaputra water and the whole of Northeast India going to be completely a desert and nobody getting water and that sort of thing. And it was, being really rolled out in very venomous language. Now, I had the opportunity to talk to the Water Secretary from India, chap in charge of water resources. And I asked him, how much is India dependent on the water from Brahmaputra? And his answer was, it's less than 5%. So it wasn't going to be a great situation, even if they did. They were not going to do it, but even if they did it, it was not no big deal. But the newspapers gave the idea that the whole of India is going to be starved of water. That's one. Second was the ballistic, the missile test. Indian newspapers had maps showing which are the cities in China that India can get. My colleague, Surya, wrote an article, which was very sensible, saying that all this is not going to happen. India is nowhere close to what China has achieved, but India is on the way. It is a remarkable achievement, but it is not meant for this. It's a self-this thing. But the contrast was so telling that, and it's the same with the Chinese media. And this again is another problem because the nationalism that is reflected not so much in the official papers, but in the social media, the internet, is very strident. Now, India has not understood that these are individuals who write their, vent their venom, as it were. It has nothing to do with the Chinese government, but Indians believe that anything in China is orchestrated by the government. China has moved on, but this has not registered in the Indian mind. So these are the 3 points I want to make. Now I open it to the House. Don't throw anything, but ask questions. Yes? Yes, please. Use the mic.
Can I?
Yes. If you could give your name.
Yeah, I'm Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee. Thanks a lot. I mean, it was a very illuminating discussion. I just wanted to know one thing. I'm taking on from what Ambassador Pillai said. Assuming the relationship at the media level keeps on being fairly prickly as it is now, how do you anticipate going forward? How much of a difference would that make to the India-China engagement? I mean, can business run as usual, or would it degenerate? My question is to the entire panel.
Okay. Anybody wants to take it on first? Professor Shen?
Well, I did not follow it, but could you rephrase?
Ambassador Pillai said that the relationship at the media level and also at probably at the popular level tends to be prickly, tends to be disturbed between India and China. My question is that if it continues to be like that, would that lead to a worsening of the situation between India and China, or would it be business as usual?
Certainly it would not be helpful. But if we are mature, it would not hurt us too much. For instance, when India would test a missile with a range of 5,000 kilometers, we all know how far it could reach. So China would automatically think about this. And I would say, long before this, we have tested our missile that can reach west of Europe and across the Pacific, naturally India included. So India has been under China's missile shadow for decades. Why suddenly we would feel scared? They would have a counter capability. But we have never stated, since we can, we would have the capability to counter-strike the continental America, and India has been threatened. We don't say, but India would feel. But why India need to say they have a China killer? I would only say it's not a mature kind of a journalism. But if we are mature readership, we should take it easy. Personally, I would feel only better. Many Chinese participants may disagree with me. Because now Indians feel better, we may have a better chance to have a balanced relationship. If I am an Indian, I would always feel unhappy and insecure because China has its missile capability that can reach India. Certainly it's not intent to be against India, it's for its own protection vis-a-vis America. But since you have the capability, my security is at your mercy of your good intention, which I do not feel secure. Now I have capability. You have to care your own, the consequence of your own incautiousness. So I feel better. So why not let India feel better? If the Indian feel better, and they would have less chance to be nationalistic. So India need to experience a period of nationalism to be mature. And we may take it easy. That's my view.
Yes, Mr.
Sorry, actually, Professor Shen, I have a story on visa as an Indian getting a visa to China, which I'll explain to you afterwards. But just to deal with the question, I agree that I think maturity is called for, but I think business is reasonably mature. I mean, on both sides. I mean, I think China, despite having terrible relations with Taiwan politically, business has carried on merrily throughout, even though there were no flights until quite recently. And I think that's the same with India. I think the political relationship, even if it were to deteriorate, God forbid, but even if that were to happen, I think the business would go on. On the visa, I should tell you my story. I have an Indian passport, and I went to the Chinese embassy here to get a visa, and it says, you know, fill out this form, and they say profession, I wrote journalist, and I gave the visa, they rejected. I said, why? I said, I'm going on holiday. He said, still, you're a journalist. I said, but, I'm not going to write anything. He said, never mind. I said, suppose I write something good. He said, no, we still don't want it. So I said, okay. I said, what do I do? He said, you take back the form. You bring it back. Change this. So I took back the form, came back next day, wrote Economist, and gave it to the same person. No problem. That's all.
Well, at least we can assist with a different category. But I think what upsets me is that we do issue stapled visa. That's a real problem of sensitivity. Personally, I hope this can be fixed through good diplomacy of the two countries. But in the worst case, I'm a good friend of Chinese ambassador to India. He would do per China's national interest. But I can also help personally. If there is some inconvenience, I may deliver a personal message to him.
Son, you wanted to respond to the question?
Yeah, I got a question.
I thought we should all tell visa stories. As a journalist with a British passport and a journalist stamps, I can't have a holiday in China or neither country will. India will sometimes give visas. I get a letter from the editor of The Economist saying that I'm not going to write anything there. But otherwise I can't give a visa to India. But on the more general point, I'd like to come to defense of India. I mean, I can see that some parts of the media coverage of India are unhelpful and to a certain extent overblown, and that some commentary has been captured by quite a limited number of voices who are always heard. But I don't think it's making up for tensions. I mean, I think it's India's job to describe them when there are tensions there, and to help explain why.
Okay, close.
Well, don't talk about the visa issue. Actually, if we talk about this visa issue, every Chinese will be angry. I left China in 1990. I still hold a China passport. Every time I go to different embassies and to get visa, China always number 4, Iran, Iraq, North Korea, then China. So always that's I would say yes, the media impact. I think because both China and India regard the other side as nationalistic. I don't think the media will do a good thing, because for media in both countries, no negative news is not good news. They always report positive things, but the bad things. China media now is following very fast this trend. The issue is the decision-making body, whether the decision-making body will be affected by the media. That's very important. Whether the media will dominate this foreign relation discourse. Well, if we compare the United States and China, people always say, well, people in the United States can affect their foreign policy, but it's not China. But it's actually not true. Actually, in the United States, actually diplomacy is quite autonomy, and they can be separated from society, and at least the president is so powerful. But in China, actually not. And China is still is regarded as an authoritarian system. But more and more, the leadership has to pay attention to society, because if you look at the nine members of standing committee, because no good system for what China called intra-party democracy, so everyone is subject to public opinion. That's obviously that trend continues. That people should worry about.
Yes, another question, Sunanda. No, you will have to go. Oh, sorry. One minute. He's been waiting at the mic.
Yes. I think this question is very important. I'd like to address this issue on disconnection in media reports. Because is there have the panel ever been successfully identified such disconnection in media reports? Because from my level of point of view, even in Western countries and China, the relationship is not so scrutinized by the media. But when it comes to India-China relationship, as if there is a very strong ethnic pride, or is there some other factors that the media can easily scrutinize the actual facts. So what is the level of governance? The level of governance in terms of China media's maybe a strong state control, and perhaps they may not arouse the situation. But for how about the India's media? Is it a very freelance, totally freelance? I mean, the media can actually write anything they feel. They are just because of their own ethnic pride kind of thing, and they can just express very freely. They can write whatever. But as the case mentioned, about 5% the water supply is just 5% of the population. Affected only 5%, but it actually blow the whole thing. So is that because of ethnic pride? And what is the level of governance in the India's media? Will you address that point? My point of inquiry. And my second question. That's has the panel ever been able to identify whether what is the common interest or strategic interest that can actually, like, okay, maybe the industrial park kind of thing, the Suzhou industrial park kind of thing. Is there any strategic interest that can have long-term cooperation? If let's say you are unable to identify such strategic interest of long-term cooperation, I guess the media will have a very big part to play because it can easily swing the relationship. If there's you can't identify any long-term strategic interest of cooperation involving high level of government officials, I believe this relationship will just kill fluctuation. What's your view on that? Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, any takers?
Just on the question of the different media systems, I mean, obviously that is an issue. There's a bit of a mismatch, although the Chinese media is changing. It's becoming more verified than has been the case in the past, and that's got its good sides. I think overall it's a good thing. There is a problem in the way in which many other countries, not just India, though, interpret the Chinese media, because many of us still tend to base our views on an outdated notion of China as being some sort of a totalitarian society where only that which is fully approved by the government or the party is actually published, and that is clearly no longer the case. We have to have a better understanding of what Chinese statements, what Chinese media outlets are really authoritative, and at what level are they authoritative, and where we can discount or apply at least less concern, less attention to other sorts of statements. And it's difficult. It's not a science by any means. We're dealing with a moving target. A lot of discussion in more recent years about some statements, in particular by PLA figures. Now surely they couldn't say these things if they weren't authorized to say them. So if they're saying them, somebody has authorized it, even if they are subsequently deniable. Other people say, no, these chaps are speaking, they're not speaking in an official fora, they've got to earn a living like anybody else, they give lectures and so on, they have a following on the Chinese domestic internet, they know what serves their interests best and so on. So it's really quite complicated. However, I still think that's preferable to there simply being one version of things. Now, India does not have one version and has never sought to have one version. As China attaches more and more importance to soft power, one of the themes that we hear increasingly frequently, often enunciated by now Vice Foreign Minister Fu, that China needs to be able to tell its story. Well, true enough, but which story? It seems to be one of the great advantages that India has, is that India has so many different stories. The actual variety of India's stories and the ways in which the messages are conveyed actually serve interests very well. And one of the things that makes India's global presence look relatively benign, if more people in China were able to give their own stories, if the authorities were more relaxed about letting people tell the real Chinese, the many Chinese stories, all their complications, you know, ugly as well as beautiful, sad as well as happy. I think overall that would serve China's interests in a more positive way. The second question, really quickly,
the second question is regarding whether you have a project like Suzhou.
Yes, long-term strategic interest.
Yes.
Yeah, strategic interest. I'm sure that if the will was there to come up to create them, they could create them. My friend, a former Indian government servant now working in a think tank, Jayadeva Ranade, has written a quite interesting piece recently on India-China relations. And he points to the development of high-level cooperation in the environment and ecological areas as being something where India and China do actually have quite serious strategic interests. We mentioned earlier the stories about, the untrue stories, but widely believed stories about India seeking to control the waters of Brahmaputra. Okay, that story wasn't true, but what happens on the Tibetan plateau, frequently referred to as the third pole, has major impacts on global climate and therefore major impacts on agricultural productivity, particularly in China and India. There are very real reasons why China and India should be able to do more serious work together in this area, involving, you know, application of resources, involving application of scientific knowledge, involving large-scale joint projects in development of green industries, where China has been doing a great deal in recent years. I mean, I mentioned that as one example, but you need to have the will there to start with.
Okay, next question.
We move rather away from the media, sir, but I wanted to bring a factual point to your notice. If India didn't have an independent, relatively fearless, and perhaps intrusive media, the world may not have known even to this day that the Chinese had built a road from Tibet to Xinjiang through Aksai Chin. The Chinese government denied it, the Indian government denied it, and I'm proud to say that my newspaper at the time, which wasn't a nationalist newspaper, it was British owned and British edited, The Statesman, sent a reporter and found that the strategic road had been built. And the next day in Parliament, much to Pandit Nehru's embarrassment, every opposition member had a copy of the Statesman Road in his hand. Now, apropos of that, the role of the Indian media, the role of the Chinese media, Professor Chanson Sen, who was sitting at the back somewhere, organized a similar seminar a year and a half ago. And he honored me by asking me to come from Calcutta to speak at it. I did some research, and I found that there were 12 Chinese journalists in Delhi. 12 Chinese journalists. And they wrote in their papers a fraction of what the 3 Indian journalists in Beijing wrote. And why was that? And I asked a friend of the British High Commission, who was a Chinese specialist. And he said their role in Delhi is not to disseminate information, it's to collect information. I leave you with that thought about the respective roles of our 2 media establishments. And I would add to that that I've visited Hong Kong many times when it was a crown colony, and remember Shinua as virtually the People's Republic's embassy.
Okay, let's speak. Yeah.
Actually, there were a few people who commented about the ISAS. I thought I'd mention this. I come from Sri Lanka, from India's backyard. Sri Lankans see China as a very friendly country. In fact, without China's help, diplomatic, economic help, Sri Lanka wouldn't have defeated terrorism. And today, Chinese can come to Sri Lanka without a visa. And from last month, even Australians had to apply for a visa to come to Sri Lanka. Now, my question is on something else. There is no forum in Asia like the European Union. When the European Union meets, the media in the region reports about the European agenda. Maybe the Germans and the French disagree and others, but it's about the European agenda which is being reported by the media. Today, the East Asia Summit has become APEC #2 after the Americans and the Russians were invited to join in. So we don't have an Asian forum where the two great powers and the rest of Asia get together, talk, and set an Asian agenda. Because I can remember last year when the Americans were invited for the first time in Vietnam, and Hillary Clinton came and raised the South China Sea issue. And that became what was reported about the East Asia Summit, even by Asian newspapers. So is that the problem? Because we don't really have an Asian forum like the EU, so that the issues which are relevant to Asia is not being reported by the media. But I would like to know.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, my name is Kang Li, ethnic Chinese. I'm a blogger. I blog in English. I translate myself into Hindi and in Mandarin. Okay, that's just the background. Okay, when we talk about economics and the economic growth of India and China, and The Economist, I think, wrote an article about this in 1994 when they said that India and China were actually mirrors, their strengths and weaknesses actually were complementary. I think the stereotype today is that China is all manufacturing, India is all outsourcing. But a few people have pointed out to me that there is some cross-pollination in terms of India taking over some manufacturing, China is getting some services. Now, extend things from that economic sphere. Does anybody see a situation where there'll be some cross-pollination in the political system and in the political ideas of the media? Because you have a system now where, I mean, India is justifiably very proud of its democracy in the last 50 years, but you talk to a lot of Indian businessmen, and what they're saying is that, you know, especially if you compare the 2010 Commonwealth Games in Delhi to the 2008 in Beijing, a lot of Indian businessmen are saying we need a government like China that will grab the nation by the scruff of its neck, pull it up into the modern age. But then in China, you also have, at the same time, a very interesting phenomenon of microbloggers. You know, China, the government has banned a lot of social media, but the Chinese versions have come up. And I think Channel News Asia did a series on one of the most popular bloggers in China who's got something like his daily hit rate is in a couple of millions, and he actually turned down meeting Barack Obama. So do you see the situation where the Indian government tries to become more like a strong centralized system like China, and a system in China where more people start to clamor for more freedoms and more freedom of speech?
Okay. Thank you. I'll pause here and ask the panelists to comment, answer, whatever they want to do. Start with.
I just want to comment on what you're saying. I think you're pointing to something, or you have your finger on something that's very important. I do think this, I heard actually on the first part, that is Indian businessmen found that the Chinese system, in a sense of getting the things done, get the trees on time, sometimes very attractive to the Indian business community. But on the other hand, there is exactly what this gentleman expressed so well in your comments about the India press. Because when you see that, I can already see a tremendous sense of pride. You have a free press, whereas the Chinese press is only a government agent. But you know, as it was mentioned earlier, I think that notion of the Chinese press is changing. So I do think that these days more journalists are coming to India, to New Delhi, to report, rather than just to collect information. So that is already an evidence of this movement ongoing. But on the other hand, I don't know whether the India side is moving towards, you know, in terms of running the government and kind of towards the Chinese model. I can't comment on that. But in terms of the Chinese press, media system, even among the scholarly community, I myself have quite extensive connections with the Chinese scholarly community. I think there is a growing interest, not just on American scholarship, but in Indian scholarship. And I think that is a very interesting development. And again, I don't know whether the Indian scholars see anything coming out of Chinese scholarly community that you think is worthwhile. But I certainly see on the Chinese side that this is happening.
You want to say?
With the emergence of those social media, I think it's very interesting that there are many opinion shapers now. And the governor of Canton province tell people that every morning he will read those bloggers and those internet champions. He will spend some time. And State Councilor Madame Wu, finishing her visit to Japan prematurely, returned to Shanghai, and he asked the people who read her, what's the internet discussion about my early return to China? So that explains that there is significant change. And I don't know the other gentleman's point about Xiaqing very much, but at least he pointed that there are 3 Indian journalists in China. I think that's not enough. You should send 30.
The 3 write 3 times as much as the 12 Chinese in Delhi.
They write a lot, and we need to send more, but and they need to work write more. So you make point. But we are a country that they write for the public readership, and also they, the journalists also assume an institutional responsibility. That is to advise the government. I will not say it's espionage. It is those which is not suitable for printing. But good, for instance, if our diplomat would have some mishandling and the ambassador would not report, and they have responsibility in fixing China's problem by reporting to the system, to the editor-in-chief. So this is our system, and in my view, it's part of the job. And for Xiaqing, Chinese government printed its commemorative stamps, which shows a map with our highway printed. That's a way to announce, which may offend India, and we need to fix this. To me, if I would handle, I would talk to India. I'm interested in doing this. So, my buddy, what's your opinion? And you say, you disagree. And I would say, let's make a compromise, which would minimize the negative consequence of the unilateral handling of this. Over time, we grow from a semi-colonial system, become independent, and we feel proud, and then we could be quite nationalistic. When we are grown up, we know how to respect each other. So I think current China-Indian relationship has been much more mature. When Indian press often print that the Chinese soldier across the border and to incur into India, our media would do similarly. But how eventually the two governments settled such kind of thing which destabilize the public perception? What I heard is that the two governments made a decision. In the morning, your side would have patrol. We tend not to see. But actually, you enter some place that we believe that belongs to China. And our media would have no chance to know it. And in the afternoon, we do it. You pretend not to see. So this is a way to have an interim kind of a peaceful coexistence. But eventually, we need to draw the line, demarcate the line clearly, and there will be no chance legally ambiguous to make each side upset.
Professor Srinivas, you wanted to say something?
First, let me begin with an anecdote. 10 years ago, I was part of a group, Francis Franklin led, to prepare a book on what US should know about India and China. It was published eventually. Francis Franklin and Harry Harding in the book. That's where I started, the India-China part of that,
Maybe you could speak.
as part of that book enterprise, we went to China, and I still vividly remember talking to Chinese vice minister. I don't remember his name right now, and we drifted into discussing free press, democracy, etc. The Chinese vice minister gave me 1-hour lecture on what is wrong with India's democracy and what is wrong with India's press, neither of which was informed by any knowledge whatsoever of either Indian democracy or Indian press. That was the state of knowledge, or that is the state of knowledge that he wants to convey to the delegation, scholars who are interested in promoting the knowledge about China in the US, etc. That was the state of affairs 10 years ago. Now, I'm on the question of media, may make just one point. Your point was free press. That is free press. That's free is a very important word there. Now, once governments begin using press for floating things or doing things for what the government doesn't want to do, say it directly, openly, etc., that's the road to destroying whatever would remain as free press. So the only role media could play is to come back to its main purpose, namely as a free agent in a democratic society. And if it is not that, if you become reflecting owners' interest or government's interest, whatever, not the information provided and improving the situation like this. The last point I want to make is the disconnect that we talked about between the strategic, the security community, and the economics and the business. My view of strategic security communities is populated by paranoids, absolute paranoids. Whether it is Chinese security community or Indian security community, each is paranoid. And there is no way that is going to change anytime soon. And so this disconnect, however counterproductive it might be, is going to continue. And so given that, it seems to me we have to place our the hopes on the business and other economic interests coming in the way of promoting as we were talking about India, Pakistan. That is happening now, not because the media promoted it or the others promoted it, but business communities in both India and Pakistan want to have much closer economic relations, primarily economic relations, but incidental relations too. So as far as I can see, the economic strengthening of the relationship between the two countries eventually will lead to the paranoids being changed also, but not the other way around. Expecting the paranoids to change tomorrow is waste.
Thank you. I think we can allow 2 more questions. Yeah. Young lady.
My name is Shruchi. China in recent times has invested heavily in international news media. So I'm not aware of whether these international news media which have presence in parts of Europe, Africa and elsewhere, whether they have considered making a presence in India as well, and if there is, and whether there can be a possibility, such a possibility in near future, and can that be seen as a positive step in the China-India relations?
One more question and then we'll leave it to the panel to answer. One more? No?
Just make a suggestion. Picking up from Professor Zhao's address about people-to-people relationship. I would recommend an invasion of China by Indian cultural groups at all parts. Would they be welcome everywhere in China? This would bring people closer together to understand each other's culture. Chinese culture is well known. We all know about it. But I don't think within China, today's China, the young people, would they know? I don't know. What do you think of that?
Just, Mr. Jumaboy, if I may say, I think the Chinese probably know much more about Indian culture than Indians know about Chinese culture. When I was a student in the university, I remember one English publication from Beijing that came, that had pages and pages of a play, Shakuntala, which was staged in Beijing, with photograph, beautiful photographs, number one. Number two, when I was ambassador to Iran, Singapore Chinese opera sent a team to Iran. That's, yes, the gentleman's here. And you know what they showed in Iran? Ramayana, an episode from Ramayana. And later in Singapore, I saw that. They have the best Hanuman I've seen anywhere in the world, including India. You know, it's excellent because the Chinese take things seriously. They study it very deeply, and when they do it very well. You know, there are a lot of Indian scholars who understand Chinese culture, but I've seen this in my own experience. Okay, maybe panel can answer.
This year there will be some 10 Indian dancing troops coming to Shanghai. One time I flew to Beijing, probably 70% of the passengers were Indian tourists. I feel so happy. And the Indian consulate asked me to pay for one of the dancing troops' performance at the Fudan. Despite the fact that my institute had a very limited budget, I agreed. And undemocratically, before consulting with other institute key stakeholders, I made an agreement. Yes, we will pay. Just because I want to open our students' opportunity to see the beauty of this and to change their perception, hopefully to a higher level than the movie actor Raja Kapoor. That modern contemporary Chinese should know contemporary Indian arts. When you know it, you appreciate it, you respect it. Then, as this gentleman mentioned, the inevitably the strengthened economic bond would dispel the hysteria, and each side need to do this.
I just want to follow that, and I'm so glad you raised the point about people-to-people exchange, because when you talk about this, and when Professor Shen talked about the India opera coming to China, I'm sure it's not a for-profit business, right?
It's well, two universities, absolutely.
Exactly.
It's not for profit.
Right. So in that context, I want to come back to that point about free press. See, because of influence by the American model, when you say free, only in terms of press, is only if you can see it profitably. So the free press is mediated by capital, by the market. And when that happened, a lot of voices that could not be said profitably were being filtered out. And so that, for me, is very important justification for what you mean by free press. And precisely because of that limitation of the free press, in quotation marks, we need more interaction that's beyond this particular notion of free press. And this kind of cultural exchange, people-to-people exchange, that's outside what can be done profitably is so important. And in that context, government has a role, university has a role, individuals has a role. And I think as long as this realm of exchange that's beyond that particularly defined press freedom can be carried on, I think there's a lot of hope. So that's one point. And just a response to a question raised by that lady there. It's interesting you ask this question because in the effort for the Chinese media to go abroad, I've read a lot of reports everywhere, you know, CCTV North Africa, CCTV North America. But I haven't seen much about Chinese media effort to project its voice in India. Maybe I just missed that. But I can cite a personal example that actually one of my most proud graduate students who got his MA degree from Canada is sending by China Daily to open China Daily's India Bureau, just probably next month or sometime. So the Chinese media, again, you know, is expanding in terms of getting more report, but I don't know much about whether, for example, CCTV is trying to have its presence in India, and I don't know if that happens, what India free press will see. I mean, you know, of course it's free in the sense of free from government control. Whether that can be seen as, you know, a negative thing, that is, you know, Chinese propaganda come to India. Because when Chinese media, CCTV also, expand to North America, that's absolutely negative report from the free press in North America. This is communist propaganda. So anyway, I will stop there.
Yes. I'll give them all a chance for 2 minutes.
I just wanted to pick up on 3 points. Firstly, Sunanda's, I'd like to spring to the defense of my friends in the Xinhua Delhi Bureau. The Xinhua
Hong Kong Bureau, I said.
Yeah, well, Hong Kong is a special case. I mean, the Xinhua for years was a sort of unofficial liaison office. Xinhua, at least out of Delhi, is quite prolific. I don't know about the People's Daily CCTV. I wasn't even aware China Daily were there. But I think that was a little unfair. And the point that Professor Giles made true is that these people now have huge and expanding outlets to film. And they've got all these 24-hour television stations. The wire service is very prolific. They have a day job to do as well as whatever else is. Secondly, the very interesting points made by our blogger friend on the complementarity of the two economies. I think it was Zhu Rongji, wasn't it, about 10 years ago, said that you know, we're #1 in manufacturing, you, India, are #1 in software. Together we can make beautiful music. I mean, I don't think it's quite worked out like that, because I think Chinese manufacturers have found it a lot easier to penetrate India than Indian software and outsourcing firms have to get into China for a whole lot of reasons. I saw just last week the chief executive of TCS, the largest software firm, was complaining about the failure so far to build a Chinese client base. That although they've got a lot of business in China, it's mainly with their international clients. Thirdly, on your point about the two different political systems, yes, I've heard those complaints many times from Indian businesses about two disadvantages, or two advantages that they see their Chinese competitors having. One is that, as you say, the government, when it wants to do something, can get it done, and it's not held up by endless lawsuits and problems. The other is that they would allege that their competitors benefit from all sorts of hidden subsidies in the form of cheap land, cheap credit, which they would like to have. But so you hear those complaints in India. I have to say, no, you hear similar complaints about the difficulty of democracy votes in many places around the world, like my own country, most of Europe, and America. But I don't see an appetite in any of these places for in terms of the Chinese system. And one thing about that almost every Chinese person I speak to about the Chinese political system is that they agree it will change. They might disagree about what into what, but that it is in some form of evolution.
I want to make comments about this free media. As a scholar, of course, I have read many, India coverage on China, China coverage on India. I think besides what Professor Zhao mentioned, in the actual free media is not free actually. For example, As I mentioned earlier, media now in China is interest-driven. As long as they can sell more copies and make profit, they will say something, even they do not agree with that. But overall, I compare the two sides coverage. I would say, and when China, actually I read a lot of news coverage in China about India, saying nice things. For example, a lot of Chinese medias, and not global time, but a lot of local medias, talk about how China can learn from India, because of course China's economic infrastructure is much better than India, but India's social infrastructure is much better than China. Many nice things about India, and overall, I would say the Chinese actually are trying to learn more from India. But the India side, and despite I would say you mentioned the free media, I would say a lot of India coverage are too ideological, and India, of course, are very proud about democracy, about all kind of things. And but when they see and when you look at China through this angle, then they're not going to understand China at all. What's happening? Really, what's happening inside? That not only in India, even Chinese neighbor like Taiwan, or I would say Hong Kong, because when you see they're too proud about the democracy, human rights, then they're not. When they see China, perceive China from that perspective, then I don't think the level of understanding China in India, even in Taiwan, is so low, very, very low. They talk about all those values, ideological things, but they're not examining what really happened in China. So I would say, because China is in a transition period, a lot of things are going on, even in terms of democratization, also many things are going on. But no report, no coverage, even like a journal, very famous journal, a magazine like Economist, they always everything about China, particularly about the Chinese Communist Party, must be bad. That kind of assumption, I would say, is very dangerous. Will not help the leader understand China. Right? So we want a new China, not perceived this China. That's very important.
Well, look, just very briefly, I think the really interesting thing is that we are having this discussion. 10 years ago, I don't think we would have been having the discussion. China-India relations is becoming the latest growth industry in people who look at international affairs, and so it should be. And I would hope that we're able, as the relationship matures, and as all of the rest of us who look at the relationship and wish it well, because goodness gracious, for all of us who live in the world, and particularly in this part of the world, we should certainly want a more positive, comprehensive relationship between India and China than a poor one, which really certainly doesn't serve the purposes of, I think, of any of us in this room, or of our descendants for that matter. There are clearly great problems of misperception. Some of the misperceptions are the problems of real differences, and we shouldn't ignore those differences. We've got to talk about the different systems, different understandings, different media systems. In this, of course, business can play an important role, because the desire to make a profit, and I don't mean that in a cheap and nasty way, is one of the fundamental things that has moved the world from the earliest times and has brought people together. I mean, you look at the contact between civilizations historically largely been based around trade routes, and that can certainly continue to be the case, but we can't expect business to do it all, and good economic relationships alone do not make a more broadly based, lasting relationship. The media has a role to inform. Of course, it has a role to report, good, bad, indifferent, but it also has a role to inform. But in order to inform, it needs to be better informed itself, and that's where again people in this room perhaps have a role to play. And one perhaps encouraging point that came out in the discussion earlier today was that while there have been problems, sometimes quite serious problems in terms of reporting, we were talking about India reporting vis-a-vis China in this case, exclusively from media reports published in India by journalists or editors in particular in India. Indian correspondents in China, who are more well informed, have some greater understanding of the complexities of the current Chinese situation, tend to provide much more balanced reporting. So the more of those sort of contacts we have, the more well informed correspondents we have on both sides, I think the better things can be. And on the final point about systems, yeah, China is changing. We're not quite sure where it's going. This leads, it opens us to a degree of optimism. It also opens us to a degree of caution. One of the great things I think India has going for it in terms of its global perception is that we're pretty certain that India, from in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, 30 years' time from now, is going to be pretty much the India we know. It's going to be more wealthy, it's going to be more influential, but in terms of the way it operates, the way it behaves domestically, the way it organizes its affairs, it's not going to be very, very different, and that's a good thing. With China, we can't be sure. We just don't know. They don't know in China either. And I'll leave it there.
You don't need it. Vikram. Any last words of wisdom?
Very quickly, I know we're running fast, short of time. On the question of convergence of systems, will China open up, and does India want a more centralized system? No, India definitely does not. It just wants better governance. I don't think there's any chance of more centralization in government in India. And China opening up, and that's an interesting question. I think there is a demand for accountability, it's obvious. Especially you can see it after the ISAS-EAI incident. The people in China, whenever any population is more affluent, they want middle class, they want more things, they want more accountability. That's true in India as well. On Xinhua, I have to agree with Simon there. Presolanda is a lovely story, but Xinhua is since professionalized. And I think they have...
I was talking of the Hong Kong Bureau at a particular time. I said that in correspondence.
Yes,
no, I was thinking about how much work they were doing.
Anyway.
Between Chris Patton and Beijing, yes.
But no, but I mean, to the extent that that was illustrative of a broader point, I think the point now is they have a very professional situation, a very professional setup.
I didn't say they didn't.
Yeah, okay. That's good. Okay, we agree then. Okay, finally on, I think the problem is, one of the big problems in China is with movies, I have a problem. They only allow 20 foreign movies a year. 25, is it? 35 now, okay. It was 22, I think, about 3 or 4 years.
From February, we added 15.
Oh, brilliant. Fantastic. Most of them are Hollywood. And I think there was one Indian movie that made it called 3 Idiots, which went on to be a huge hit in China. And I hope China does more of that, because I think India will speak to the people of China through its movies.
Thank you. I first want to thank Professor Wang Gangwu and Professor T.N. Srinivasan for launching the book. Congratulations to Amit Nandu. I want to thank the panelists for a very lively question and answer, and also their initial comments. I'd like to end on a rather optimistic note. I feel that what business has achieved in both countries, 2 examples, a Chinese investment in somewhere around in Maharashtra. The main investor, he was so pleased with what he had achieved. For the official opening, he flew in the party secretary from his province. This is the sort of thing that gives me hope. Similarly, Tata Consultancy, what Girija Pandey, he's not here, he's gone to the US, what he has achieved in China, I think it's less than 5 years or thereabouts. About 20,000 people are working in China, and their interchange of staff between India and China. I think these give me great hopes that the future, though it will progress rather slowly, there will be suspicions on both sides. But I think the people-to-people contact that Mr. Vimaboy mentioned, I think is very important, and I think that is growing. 500,000 tourists from India to China, that's a good start. I think we will see better days again. And I like to say that ISAS will continue to do this, bridging the information gap. We'll have another conference sometime in November with quite a number of scholars, both from China and policymakers. One of the most optimistic thing I've seen is the policymakers in India. I think Professor Srinivasan mentioned that the security people are the most difficult to convince. I've talked to some of the security people in India, and their view I found to be much more broad-minded in their approach. For instance, they say the immediate neighborhood, the concerns of China's activities in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh and so on, they rationalize it quite sensibly. They say, look, a small country with a big elephant in the room will always look for other allies. It's only natural, and there's nothing to be concerned about. China's involvement in Sri Lanka goes back hundreds of years. It's not something that has started today. Somebody showed me a tablet when I was in Colombo. The tablet listed down all the duties for various items. And it was in 3 languages: Arabic, Tamil, and Chinese. Unfortunately, there was no Sinhalese, but there was Tamil. So, because the trade must have been done by the Tamil traders and the Chinese traders and the Arabic traders. So these relationships have been there for a very, very long time. You put on different glasses, you see things differently. But I think we will work on it and we'll try and solve it. Thank you very much. I'll pass it on to Kim.